So during the shelter in place time, one of the things that have become very important to me is birding. When I feel disturbed, and there are many reasons now to be disturbed, the most effective balm for my soul is to gaze through a pair of binoculars and to look intently at whatever bird I can find. The Gospel of Matthew tells us, "Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows." There's a special discipline to looking at sparrows. First, they aren't easy to catch in binoculars because they flit around and don't perch very often. Moreover, the various kinds of sparrows are so similar, it's difficult to separate them. And if they don't stand still, it's really hard to see what their markings are. Yet, there is a thrill of happiness I experience when I can pick out the difference between a golden-crowned sparrow, a savanna sparrow, a white-crowned sparrow, a house sparrow, a song sparrow, and what I'm pretty sure was a marsh sparrow. To take a really good look at these mundane birds and see its subtle qualities and to find joy in it is really to see with the eyes of God. God's eyes gaze upon us, and we are known and loved and enjoyed. And yet most of the time we don't live as if this is true. We are instead afraid, and we don't even know it sometimes. We don't know we are afraid, but we're acting out. We recoil, we get paranoid, we go on the attack, or we become defensive and judgmental. We make the worst of differences. These days, we live under a general malaise of COVID and racial agony. It is hard to really take in the scope of how this affects us. When we first entered Corona tide, I showed a graph of the emotional curve we would travel in the midst of disaster. After the honeymoon, where we experience a high of togetherness, there is the longer and deeper period of disillusionment. We are no longer in the honeymoon period, my friends. The outrage over the lynching of George Floyd has made this even clearer. There is fear to our left and to our right. Jesus says 3 times today in the gospel reading, "Do not be afraid." But the picture he paints doesn't help. He says, "Do not think I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law. And one's foes will be members of one's own household." The context in Matthew was a church that had gone through division, both internally with its own membership and externally with the synagogue and with the Roman Empire. Matthew is very much a gospel of escalating crisis and conflict. The concern of the Matthean community was the work of the kingdom of heaven. As I quoted last week from O. Wesley Allen's Jr.'s commentary, he says, Matthew's reign of heaven, as a metaphor for God's eschatological reign of justice and mercy, should be understood as contrasted with the reign of the world, especially, although not solely, with the oppression of Caesar. Not everyone was on board in Matthew's community with the ultimate logic of what the reign of heaven would mean. What it meant was that there would be a restructuring of society that would defund the legions and redistribute abundance to benefit the oppressed and the poor. This was threatening to those who benefited from the privileges of the Pax Romana, and they wanted to preserve the status quo, even though it meant more and more years of policing the land by the legions, which killed the people and brutalized the population. Jesus told his disciples that the very work of fulfilling the reign of heaven will create divisions, even among family members, church members, and social clubs. There are among us who love the status quo and love our privileges. Those who keep pushing for reform, Jesus says, will be persecuted and even crucified. He tells them at the beginning of our gospel reading, a disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher and the slave like the master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his household? So what Jesus means here is, I will have it bad because I'm for the reign of heaven. And if you follow me, you will have it just as bad or worse. You're not going to escape suffering if you do the work of the reign of heaven. Still, Jesus says, do not be afraid. He says, so have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell it in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. What destroys the soul? Look around our nation. What do you think destroys the soul? Let's just take a few seconds of silence to consider what destroys the soul of our nation. This last Wednesday, we marked the 5th anniversary of the Charleston massacre at Emmanuel AME Church, when white supremacist Dylann Roof decided that 9 Black lives did not matter, and he shot them during a Bible study. In so doing, he also killed his own soul. How are souls still destroyed today by acts of white supremacy? This Friday, we celebrated Juneteenth, which marked the delayed message of freedom to slaves in Texas, who finally heard about their emancipation 2.5 years after Lincoln's proclamation of freedom. Today, so many years after the proclamation, there is still the delayed reality of freedom. Justice delayed is justice denied, as Martin Luther King would say. What has killed the soul of our nation with all this delayed justice? We must not make peace with this soul death anymore. This is hard work, friends. Hard, exhausting work. In seminary, I was under the instruction of Dr. Vincent Harding, who was a good friend of Martin Luther King. and also his speechwriter. He told us, Vincent told us, that while the country talked about a civil rights movement, Martin, and you know they're friends because he talks about MLK as Martin, Martin had a larger vision, that of the beloved community. The beloved community can only be built if there is justice. This work of justice saves the souls of everyone because the death grip of injustice strangles both oppressed and oppressor. No one can breathe. Our destinies are bound together. The dehumanizing of the oppressed is also a dehumanizing of the oppressor. So the only way to move toward this beloved community is to recognize the humanity of what we would call other or less, those we hate. Only when we see each other as human do we take on this gaze of God. So we are not to worry about what we eat or what we drink or our bodies or what we will wear. Jesus says, is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? So our value is not in what we eat, drink, or wear, what cars we drive, what kind of houses we live in, the educational institutions we get our credentials from. But there are values, and these values are eternal. Those are the things we are concerned about. The values of justice, mercy, and love. We are concerned about them because without these values of justice, mercy, and love, we can destroy our souls. As we reach for the reign of heaven, the thing that will sustain us is to trust in God. To trust in God like a sparrow. Unlike me, the birder who strains to get a good look at a flitting little bird, the Creator can see and know and love without any binoculars. We too sometimes are like sparrows, flitting around, dashing around, because our fears chase us and we just can't perch and be still. Because it is hard what's going on. It's hard no matter where we stand. So we must trust in God in order to do this work, because God provides us with the strength in an uncertain world. So we don't have to be afraid if we work toward those things that are eternal, that do not destroy the soul. So if we do this kingdom work, we will need to take on the gaze of God, to gaze at one another with the loving gaze of God, to gaze upon ourselves with God's love. And what we will find when we practice this kind of loving gaze is that we are all connected, that we share the same gaze with God. You know, as Meister Eckhart would say, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love. And this is our sustenance as we carry on with the work of the reign of heaven. Amen.